there's a lot of companies out there that don't watch out for their employees' best interests. There's a lot of managers who don't do that. And if you don't luck into those situations, then you have to take on the ownership yourself. Like you have to take that on yourself, where you're doing that consciously, because it is ultimately, it's your career, it's your advancement, it's your life, it's your happiness. And if you won't take full ownership of that, then how can you expect somebody else to do that for you?
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is powered by Z by HP, HP's high compute workstation grade line of products and solutions. Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Shailvi Wakhlu. Shailvi is the Senior Director of Data at Strava, where she leads a large team of product analysts and machine learning engineers to enable data-informed product improvements in support of Strava Athletes. In the past, she worked at Salesforce, Fitbit, and multiple other data-rich companies, in addition to her previously running her own company. As a data leader, she focuses on harnessing the power of data to build great products, clarify strategic directions, and improve business processes. She's also passionate about mentorship in the community, and she spends her spare time volunteering for programs that further STEM education for minorities. In this episode, we learn how self-advocacy has changed her career. We learn if jumping companies is a good or a bad thing. And we also get some incredible insights on how a data scientist can hedge their work opportunities during the impending recession. I had a great and informative discussion with Shailvi, and I'm sure that this episode will provide a lot of value for you. Shailvi, thank you so much for coming on the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast. Obviously, we had a really awesome discussion offline about your history learning coding from your mother, going all the way into your career now at Strava, which I think is awesome. It's an app that I've used in the past. So I'm really
Awesome.
grateful for you to come on here, and I'm really excited to be able to talk with you about your journey through this domain and just in general through your life to this point.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Ken. I'm excited too. Really love your podcast.
Thank you so much. Well, the first question that I always ask to help me get to know you better, as well as help the audience get to know you better, is how did you first get interested in data? How did you first get interested in technology? Was there some pivotal moment, or was this a kind of slow process where you gained interest over time?
Yeah, so in my case, I was exposed to data and technology very early on in my life. So I've shared the story with you previously that my mother taught me how to code when I was 8, which was really exciting for me because I don't even remember what language it was, but it was some kind of querying language for data sets. And I just loved the whole concept of coding, that it almost felt like solving a puzzle, that she'd give me programs to write, like later in other languages, and say, oh, can you try to get a program to do this. And it would just be exciting for me to do that. I like solving puzzles. I also spent a lot of my childhood reading mystery novels, and it made me feel like a detective. So I just had that exposure very early on, and from a very early age, I knew that I wanted to be a coder as I grew up.
That's incredible. And so, I'm really interested. I mean, you talked about your mother teaching you coding. What was her background? How did she learn that skill? I don't imagine that's like incredibly common in India, where you're from, correct?
Yeah, exactly. It was very unusual. So we were one of the, I mean, I didn't have a lot of friends growing up, especially when I was very young, who had a computer in their house. So people used to actually come to our house to look at this like device that we had. And my mother and her very, very dear brother of hers had gifted her a computer, and she loved mathematics, and she was very excited about it. So she also learned how to code. She got some books, and she inculcated that same passion in my sister and me as well. And so both of us spent a lot of time on the computer, and we all sort of like just took on those new challenges of, like, in India, again, as I mentioned, very few people had computers. We were one of the first people I knew who also had access to internet much later in life, but by that time we'd already been programming for quite some time, so it was very exciting.
Yeah, it sounds like. Well, so how did that interest in programming at an early age transform into a career for you? Is that something you also studied at university, or what was the path like for you essentially to get to where you are now?
Yeah, so for me, I coded a lot. I we we had the option to take it on, like in India, in the final few years of high school, you can choose a specific set of subset of subjects that you sort of dive more deeper into. And so computer science was one of the subjects that I chose at that point. And then I wanted to study to become a computer engineer. In India, that's what you called it. You called it computer engineering. Though when I reached the US, I realized that computer engineering and computer science were a little bit different. Um, it was too late. I'd already signed up for computer engineering. So, along with all the programming and computer science stuff, I also did some robotics, which was just that came as part of the parcel. So for me, it was very intentional. Like for a very long time, I knew that's what I wanted to study, because that's what I wanted to do in my career. And I basically planned around it for a very long time. And I was very fortunate to have a good computer engineering education in college, and then land a computer science job like straight out of college. I was a software engineer. I was a full stack software engineer with a company.
So, for those that don't know, can you explain, at least to me, because I'm actually not that well informed, what the difference in computer engineering and computer science would be?
Yes. So I think most universities now, computer science is focused more on sort of the software side. So it's the programming. It's like software engineering would be the closest other term for it. Computer engineering, they also teach you about hardware. So they'll also teach you about the circuit systems. They'll also teach you about. That's why robotics came in, because we'd also have like little robots, and we'd have the software part of programming them to do something, but there'll also be the hardware part of actually getting it set up. So that was sort of the combined piece.
Really cool, really cool. And so, something a lot of people always have a question about is, like moving and getting a job in the United States. Can you talk me through that process for you, what that looked like?
Oh yeah, and that's actually, it's very interesting, because I came from India. I grew up in India. I didn't have any family in the US. So for my family and me to make that decision, for me to move, even for undergrad, was quite unusual. I didn't know any other people who did that. Of course, once I moved here, there were plenty of other people like me, but it was a bit of a struggle, because as you know, our country's immigration system is quite difficult, for people from different places to navigate. And so you can finish your education, but you have a very limited window during which you have to find a job, and it has to be directly related to your field of study. Like you can't have studied computer engineering and then suddenly decide, oh, I actually want to become a marketer. You don't have those options. So it's quite specific. It's quite different, and there's a lot of challenges that come with it. So I definitely got lucky that I actually found my first job, not even straight out of college. I had technically not graduated yet. I still had a semester left, but I just extended my studies for a whole year so that I could start working earlier. And it was a great job, because I ended up working there with that company for 6 years, but I worked in three different continents. So I didn't have to navigate a lot of the visa situation, which usually, if you're an international student, after some point you have to convert your type of visa into a different type of visa, and there's only very few number of those things available. So I didn't have to navigate that, because I just switched continents instead. It was easier.
Really cool. And how did you approach that continent move within your work? Was that something that occurred naturally? Was that something that you advocated for? How does that come about?
Yeah, like many things in my earlier career, it was one of the things that felt like it just fell in my lap at some point. That I worked with a company that had offices in multiple locations, and my boss came to my desk one day and said, hey, we need someone to move to our office in Prague. And he made it sound really exciting. I unfortunately did not know where Prague was. I could not have pointed it out on a map. I knew it was in Europe somewhere, but I'm like, okay, that sounds fun. So I agreed, and then I went and looked up what Czech Republic was. I was like, what is that? But it worked out because once I moved, once I did commit to that move, they said like, okay, this is a salary that you're going to be making there. And that was sort of my first time advocating for myself, because I'm like, okay, I'm researching a little bit online, and based on my cost of living conversion, this salary doesn't seem fair. Like, I'll basically be taking a salary hit. Like, I understand that people are paid less in that country, but I should at least be paid the same range as what I'm paid here, in terms of just purchasing power parity. So that was an interesting conversation, and I ended up having that conversation with the same company twice, because they asked me to move to Prague, but I asked them to move me to New Delhi, which is where I was originally from.
Very cool. And I'd love to hear more. You mentioned self advocacy. Can you explain to me what that means and maybe how you can actually cultivate that skill? Because I sincerely doubt that's something that we all start with. We have to learn to be able to, in some sense, speak for ourselves.
Yeah, self advocacy has been, I think, in the later half of my career, it's been the most consistent theme of something that I have done and researched and kind of improved my own skills on. Because it's, as you said, like, for me, what is self advocacy? I think it is when you advocate for yourself, when you speak up for yourself, and when you speak up for your interests and try to make sure that those are prioritized in everything that you're doing. That to me is self advocacy. And it's not something that it's definitely not something that came naturally to me. I come from a culture where it's where it's not normalized. I belong to an underrepresented group in tech. Women in general find it really hard to do that, and it's also something that's not taught. It's not I went to college, there was no class that taught you how to negotiate your first salary. There was no training that said, oh, if you're being treated unfairly, here's how to speak up and get to the outcomes that you want. So I really feel that the industry as a whole is really lacking that awareness, that we always try to give people advice that, hey, find yourself a great manager or find yourself a really good company. But that doesn't happen for everybody. There's a lot of companies out there that don't watch out for their employees' best interests. There's a lot of managers who don't do that. And if you don't luck into those situations, then you have to take on the ownership yourself. Like, you have to take that on yourself, where you're doing that consciously, because it is ultimately, it's your career, it's your advancement, it's your life, it's your happiness. And if you won't take full ownership of that, then how can you expect somebody else to do that for you?
Yeah, I mean that's incredible. And something that, for in my career, in my life, has been something unbelievably important. I mean, there's, I guess, in the United States, the idiom is, it never hurts to ask, right? But in other countries, it's like the opposite. I forget what the idioms are in China and probably in Indian culture. It's that essentially, if you ask, or like, for example, the nail that sticks out the furthest gets beat down, or something along those lines. And the
Yeah.
idea of the collective has what's best in your interest versus your individual ideas have what's, you have what's in your best interest, is inherently somewhat conflicting. And I find that really interesting because there are a lot of people who are moving from Eastern cultures to the West, and this is such a difficult concept to grasp. It's such a different skill set to develop. How do you think someone can start to learn the self advocacy skill, especially if they're coming from maybe a more Eastern culture,
Mhm.
or if they're in an underrepresented group, specifically women in the technology space?
Yeah, I think that's a great call out, that just the cultural and the gender aspect of it can be quite a bit of a hindrance itself. My thought for this is that for a lot of people, the biggest struggle is actually getting over their own sort of mental narrative of, why should I have to do this? So there's one school of thought which is, hey, I'm not like, I'm a technical person, I'm an engineer, I'm a data person. Like, this is a very salesy skill. This is not something that I should have to do, or this is not something that I can do, because it's seen as a, even asking for basic things and basic fairness is almost seen as a bad thing. That it's like, oh, you're being too out there, and you're being too flashy. And there's other things that inhibit people as well, right? It's this attitude of, same thing that you mentioned, that keep your head down, don't stick out too much. I talked about being an immigrant and working here on a visa, and that's a genuine concern for people, right? Like, if you're on a visa and you are dependent on your job for your ability to live in this country, and if you lose that job, you have 4 weeks to head out of that country. You're not gonna make a lot of noise, right? Because you don't want to risk losing your job over it. But I think the reframing that at least really helped me is that, asking to be treated in a fair manner is not something that's taking away something from someone else. Like, you're not saying, give me more than the next person. You're just being asking to be treated fairly. And it does help the business as well, when you are happy and you are productive and you don't feel like you're being taken advantage of. You will do a better job. You'll give back, to the company as well. And so I think reframing that this is something that, one, this is a skill that you should learn, because, you're not going to hire a salesperson to do to do your personal sales on your behalf. And also, this is a way to invest in yourself. It's a way to take control of your own career, of your own outcomes. So I think that reframing really helps. And then I think people can benefit by examining specific situations. So, for example, if you have trouble negotiating a salary, like, that's a very specific thing that you can try to solve for. Like, you can try to structure that, like, I have training as an engineer, I know how to break down a problem into its component parts and then just solve it. But even other things, like, how do I get a promotion, how do I ask for, more opportunities, or how do I even show the opportunities that I'm already doing, which are great, and potentially get rewarded for that. Like, I think all of those specific situations, you can seek out, help for those specific pieces, to a point where it almost becomes a norm, and it's a muscle that you built, and it comes hopefully more naturally to you in other situations as well.
Yeah, I love the idea that you have to sort of build this muscle, you have to get practice at it. And you debunked one of the most common misconceptions, which I think is really powerful, is that you're asking for yourself. It's like self-advocacy is an inherently selfish thing, which it isn't, right? It's something where you're trying to get what's fair for you, which is what's better for your company. And people don't necessarily always realize that your values, your pay, your happiness can be directly aligned with company value and those types of things. So I think self advocacy is wrong when it's detractive, when you're like, I want you to pay me as all this money because I want it,
Hmm.
versus I'm providing this value to you as your company. If you're compensating me fairly, I'm going to be able to, I'm not going to have to worry about my finances. I can dedicate more work towards more of my time and effort towards doing high quality work. Oh, I have really good insurance. I don't have to worry as much about my health. And I can dedicate that time towards giving back to the company or providing value for them there. And oh, I did this really cool thing for the company. I made them, X, Y, Z more money.
Hmm.
I'm clearly providing value. Some of that value should inherently be passed back to me because I've created for the organization. So things like that, exactly how you described. I mean, that is a way that, there's this mutual benefit equation, which I think is really special. In particular, to women in technology, I'm interested in how, um, you could, like what you would say to the majority of them who would like to advocate for themselves more. I saw some interesting research quite some time ago. I'm not sure if it was debunked,
Hmm. Hmm.
but it suggested that one of the reasons that there is, or historically has been, this pay gap between men and women is that
Hmm.
men are significantly more likely to actually ask for a raise or ask for more money. um, what are your thoughts on that? And how would you approach that that I guess like complex within the domain?
Yeah, that's a great call out. And yeah, I definitely read that research too, and even anecdotally it makes sense to me. As I mentioned earlier, that a lot of norms that we fall into are just, they're just, everybody does them, so that's what we do. So for women it's often hard to be seen as demanding, or as kind of asking for too much. So when you don't see other women doing it, or when you don't see, like, you just, if it's unfamiliar to you, you're less likely to do it. I do think that that's rapidly changing. I hope, I mean, I see that even for me as a manager, like I'm so proud every time women in my team ask for like way more money. I'm like, yes, yes to you, because I just love that, it's being talked about a lot more. But I really think that part of the problem is also just the sincere lack of data that is available to people, where they even know what to ask for, right? So there was this, when I was graduating from college, maybe the advice was, hey, don't settle for the first number, like whatever they give you, like ask for more. But what does that mean, right? Do I ask for 5 grand more? Do I ask for 30 grand more? Like, I have no idea. So I still, and I still remember the first job that I had. I did follow that advice, and so they offered me something, and I asked for 5 grand. Well, I think I asked for 10 grand more, and they gave me 5 grand more, and I was like, okay, let's, that sounds okay. And the person who had referred me to the job was so mad that I took that offer. He's like, what are you talking about? Like, they would have, like, you should have stuck with the with the 10 grand more number. And then I got mad at him. I'm like, why didn't you tell me? Like, why didn't you just tell me what to ask for? Because I don't know these things. And I think, that missing data that people don't have, like, now again, you can go on Glassdoor, you can look up the salary bands at various companies. There's levels.fii, which gives you a lot of information. There's a bunch of resources out there, but it's still hard to find. Like, it's not there for a lot of startups. So if you're in the startup ecosystem, it's not that easy to find that information. You don't know what the norm is. And you I mean, there's a legitimate concern that sometimes, you may be completely out of whack. So I think the more the industry tries to add transparency there, we shouldn't be putting the burden on people to sort of always have to advocate for themselves. Like, I've literally had situations where, we've extended offers, someone asked for X salary, and we're like, no, that's way below our band, so we're just going to give them more. Like, they asked for X, but we're going to give them more because that is the fair thing to do. And I wish more companies would have that philosophy of just doing what's the fair thing for people, like evaluate people's skills, and compensate accordingly. Like, don't base it on what they ask for, don't base it on um, some insider information that they have, because the real reason is, like, in technology there's a lot of outsiders. And I think it benefits us as an industry if we rectify that.
Yeah, I mean, and how much is it really going to cost you to pay someone a little bit extra and get them in line with other people on their team who are doing similar work versus the cost of them finding out that the person that just came on is making more money than them and they've been working there for a year, right? They're going to be really annoyed, possibly disgruntled, and that's not a problem that you necessarily want to have. Something that I find really interesting, and I can't remember who I had this discussion with, but essentially, uh, uh, some other research that I was reading, and I really should figure out and cite my sources a little bit better. But essentially, they were saying that like men and women in the workforce, they can do the exact same things, and it can be perceived differently. So let's say
Mhm.
I am somewhat confrontational.
Mhm.
I'm challenging what you're saying and whatever that might be, and because I'm a male in the workspace, that can be seen as, oh, that's a leadership quality. He's a challenger. He's trying to bring the best out of people.
Mhm.
And then, like for example, you might be doing the exact same thing, and it would be labeled as, oh, she's being difficult or something along those lines. Um, Obviously that comes into salary negotiation. That comes into all of these different things. How do we, as a community in the data science realm, how
Mhm.
do we face that? How do we confront that? How do we change that perception? I think a good start is changing like the people so that
Mm.
who are more accepting and are used to these things. But um, you know, what can we really do about that specific challenge? That's something that really bothers me, is because I've in the workspace a little bit of a confrontational style, and it bothers me that someone else who would have a similar style and be similarly like couldn't be as
Mm.
effective just because of their gender in that space.
Yeah, I think that's a really really great topic, because there's sort of that, again, that balance, right? Like, as someone who mentors a lot of people, most of them are underrepresented groups in tech. I often tell people, like, hey, this is the reality. This is sort of the status quo. I hope it shifts, and I'm doing my best to kind of, as much influence as I have to try to shift it in the industry. But here's what you can do in the meantime to sort of like respond to that. And I really try very hard to stay away from advice that basically tells people to pander, but like really tries to just again reframe it. That, so I've often sort of given people advice of restructuring their choice of words, where it is very evident that, again, like, I always come back to the business value. Like, if you're if you're taking the time out to point out some flaws and point out some gaps in the plan that your team has or something, like, that is an asset. Like, that is
Absolutely.
that is something that's beneficial, that you're giving up your time to sort of think about this and actually plan it out and do something about it. So I'm like, make sure that that comes across when you're saying that. And yes, it is an extra burden to people who are going to be perceived as sort of more on the, or like, like you said, like, for someone it might be leadership qualities, for some women it might be you're being difficult. But I still say, like, that until we have changed that perception fully, like, unfortunately, it's still something that we have to do. But again, I also say it on the other side. Like, we've had a lot of discussions in rooms where I'm like, hey, uh, like, we can't take this attitude outside. Like, we can't take this attitude when we are hiring people. We have to sort of shift this out. So I think on the hiring front, a lot of companies, for example, started like requiring you to detail, like, why, what did you make in your hiring decision, like what was something specific that you can call out. Like, it's not perfect. Like, I still think there are some gaps, but I think it's much better than people just saying, like, thumbs up, I like this person, thumbs down, I did not like this person. Because it forces you to be a little bit more objective in your analysis of a person. Adding more diversity, more voices at that stage also really helps. Because if I've had many situations where we've been on hiring panels where someone says, like, hey, actually, like, we shouldn't be dinging this person for bringing this up. Like, maybe they said this in the interview which sounded like a critique of our business, but that's actually a really astute observation. Like, we'd be lucky to have a person like this who saw something that none of us didn't. So I think having more voices in the room that'll advocate for what should be the norm is really important. And I think in data science, like, we can absolutely I think data scientists are in a good position to change the industry, because we can back our stuff up with data. Like, I
Yeah.
always insist, like, I'm like, hey, how about we also extend our hiring practices to have that same data rigor that we use in our product. And that's something that we can do.
I really like that. I think the data driven nature of the domain is really fun. Something else that I really like about this domain, I think, is that
Mhm.
the community is very strong, and that we can have these types of conversations and people will listen to them. And in my mind, that's the best way that, like, in some sense, I can help try and change anything, right? Is that we have these conversations, people are more aware of these things, and the next time they're in a meeting, they're like, oh, she's not being difficult. She's just being
Mhm.
like everyone else, and she's actually providing a ton of value in this scenario, which I would hope. I mean, I'm by no means doing that myself, but there's a lot of these conversations that are happening by people that are far more qualified than I am. Well, that's why you're here, obviously. But
You have a large
but
reaching podcast that has
but
yeah.
I think that that's something that's very special about this domain as well, is that there are a lot of these open conversations that I really don't see and a lot of other domains as well. I
Yeah.
would like to ask, this might be shifting gears a little bit, but it's still under the umbrella of self advocacy.
Hmm.
Is that, in some organizations, it's still just, isn't a fit, even if you've asked
Mm.
for what you'd like.
Yeah.
And it does come time to change positions or change to different organizations. How does self advocacy fit into that process? Is it a good thing to necessarily switch a couple of positions? Does that hurt you in this career, or is that
Mm.
generally well accepted?
Yeah, that's a I think it's a very nuanced question because what might be best for an individual may not be sort of overall, like the industry may have a different way of looking at it. So taking my own example, I stayed in my first company I worked at. I stayed there for 6 years, and the reason for that was very simple. I was happy working there. I was consistently growing in my career. Like, I had new opportunities, raises and promotions, and like new chances, and that was a good thing. And also I felt incredibly valued. Like, that company really invested in me, and they invested in my growth, they invested in my time, and in the occasional chances when I also had something personal come up, like they cared about those things as well. So I think if you're happy, if you're growing, if you're valued, that is awesome. Like, I think that's more than enough reasons to sort of stay. I think what I've seen is that it should not you shouldn't I mean, I'd love for people to stay longer in every company and role that they work at, but sometimes I feel that people are not actively thinking about what they actually want. Like, what is meaningful to you? What are your career values? What are you trying to maximize? Like, are you trying to, is learning more important to you? Is power and authority more important to you? Is money more important to you, or is it just a threshold that you're trying to meet? Or are you trying to have work life balance? And I think all of those pieces, I think that people who spend that time in building their own self awareness of what it is that they truly care about, make better decisions about being intentional about their career. And I think in those situations, when you at least have that self awareness, and you pick up the tools to learn how to sort of ask for what you need, you have a much better understanding of like whether something is a good fit or not. And if it's not, like, again, sometimes just sharing it can get you the results. Like, you can ask your manager, for example, for something very specific, that, hey, I already grow on these particular things, but I realize that I want to work backwards from this specific role that I want in 5 years, and I feel like if I don't start making those pivots now, I'll never get there. Like, is it something that's possible? And sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. I think the industry can sometimes, obviously every company that's hiring you would prefer that you stay. It's expensive to hire people. So I, in my career, I have, like, after my first job, like, I've had a lot of 1 or 2 year stints. And again, like, it's some companies actually have looked at it as a plus. My current company, when they were hiring me, they were really impressed. They're like, wow, you've done like so many different things in data science. Like, that's very unique. And that would not have happened if I was at the same company. Like, I would not have had those opportunities and those learnings. But there's also many companies who look at that as a negative. So I think if you have a good story for it, I think that really helps. But I also say that ultimately, like, you have to do what's right for you. And sometimes staying could be the right thing for you. Sometimes leaving could be the right thing for you. Just map out what you want from that change and how that benefits you in some way.
This episode is brought to you by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z4 workstation. I really love that Z workstations can come standard with Linux, and they can be configured with the data science software stack. With the software stack, you can get right to work doing data science on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show. So I think a lot of people struggle with understanding what they value. Would you be willing to explain to me maybe what your career values are and how you arrived at those? I think that specific case study would be really helpful for anyone listening. Is like, oh, this is a real person and they value these specific things, rather than talking about it in sort of these pluralities, which I have I've been known to do. That would be super insightful for me as well as the audience.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I wish I had the link, and maybe we can link it later to in the section. But there is something like I think you can Google it. It's called it's I think it's just called Career Values, and there's a couple of websites that will actually just spit out like a big list. I think maybe it's like about 24-ish different things. So examples, I'll list some of my top five, like authenticity, creativity, analytical sort of rigor, and power and authority. Like there's a couple of things in there. Money also definitely is not in my top five, but it's in that list somewhere. So the exercise is very simple. You basically look through that list, and you force yourself to stack rank. I'm big on stack ranking. Like I'm like, you really like, you really kind of look at that list and say, um, would I, if so let's pick two. So authenticity or learning. If all else being equal, would I take a role that offered me the chance to be authentic, and that can mean a lot of different things for different people, or would I take a role that offers me learning? And you'd be surprised, like you think that everybody has the same values, like of course everybody cares about money, and of course everybody cares about whatever it is that you care about. But I actually did this exercise with my team, and there were some themes that developed that, like, as a group, there were a few things that almost everybody cared about in their top five. But there can also be a lot of like specific nuances that, um, for someone, one of those values is a non-negotiable. It lands in their top five, and if their current position does not give them an opportunity to sort of like do that or to maximize that, it's not the right fit for them. So I really do think that it helps to go through that exercise and almost force yourself to do that. That um, yes, you might like money, but if it comes at the cost of work life balance, would you still want money? And I think that answer is very different for different people. So it's a nice exercise to just raise your own self awareness about that as well.
Awesome. I will definitely include that in the link in the description. That is so helpful. Like even better, like tangible tools to be able to come to these understanding of yourself. Something that I find really interesting is when values conflict. So I
Hmm.
did a similar exercise just for like my overall life. Like what do I actually value? And for example, if you value freedom and family, if those are your top two values, inherently those can conflict, right? Oh, I want freedom to travel, to do whatever. Um, but I also really care about my family and I want to be with them and those types of things. Like those two aren't necessarily like mutually exclusive and able to pursue at the same time. And so understanding that about yourself, like, oh, how do I realign my values? How do I think about this in a different way is a great learning experience because you have to like decouple the conflicts that you have in your career ambitions in your life and those types of things. And to me that was one of the most freeing things that I've experienced is I was able to say, oh, okay, objectively this is what I value, this
Hmm.
is where the friction in my life comes from because my values are colliding, and how do I navigate that, how do I build systems or how do I create a life around that where everything is in symbiosis. um, Something you mentioned in that's one of your values is authority and I guess like growing in an organization, and I would lump that under the broader category of leadership.
Hmm.
um, One, how did you get into leadership,
Hmm.
and two, maybe what skills are useful there rather than as an individual contributor?
Yeah, I mean, I think influence and power and authority, like, definitely resonates, because I derive a lot of my personal thing from how much impact am I able to have, how much positive impact am I able to have. And I think for me, my paths to sort of like leadership and management has been interesting, because I resisted purely managerial roles for a very long time in my career. I didn't want to be sort of typecast as like, oh, this person is a manager, and I really wanted to build on my technical skills. So I didn't actually take on like a fully management position until just about 2 or 3 years ago. Actually, that was the first time that I took on a role that had no IC component. And it's interesting because as an individual contributor, you have a lot more control over your output. whatever you're trying to do, you can pick up the skills, you can get to what outcomes you want a lot more, because everything is within your power. Management is not like that. Like, you are constantly dealing with things that are unexpected. You are dealing with, your job is to motivate other people to get to the outcomes that you want, but that's not that's it's a bit of a science, but it's also a bit of an art. And I think management, I feel, is incredibly hard work. And I very strongly believe that, especially in technology, like, I wish we as an industry would agree that it is not a promotion, it is a different job. That good ICs, good individual contributors, don't just, like, they don't necessarily make good managers, and sometimes the opposite. So I think explicit training is very important. I think it benefits companies when they invest in that as a skill set, because I think some of the skills are not they're not they're not as tangible. Like, as an IC, you can say, like, you know learn Python, learn SQL, learn these pieces, learn how to develop your business sense, and, like, those are a little, they have more structured sort of outcomes. But as a leader, the some of the skills you need to have is, hey, plan for the unexpected and be flexible when something completely out of whack happens. But there's no checkbox at which you can say, like, I have trained you, you went through the training material, and now you are flexible. Like, that's that's not something that you can really do. But I think a lot of it is just being comfortable doing things that you are not an expert at. Like, I think anytime there's something on your team that nobody else can do, managers and leaders are typically expected to just figure it out. And that dealing with that ambiguity, dealing with that sort of unexpected nature of the job is just something, like, some people like it, some people don't. Like, what are you supposed to do if a report starts crying during your meeting? Like, that's, you can try to simulate it, you can try to learn from it, but if you don't have that basic empathy, if you don't have that basic willingness to figure it out, and you're not overly worried that you'll fail or look silly or something, then I think like those skills really help.
That's awesome. I think something that um, I was seeing in what you were saying there is that this randomness, this unexpected nature of the work, it's actually quite similar to what someone would see in entrepreneurship, right?
Yes.
And you'd also described to me offline how your mother is actually quite entrepreneurial. I'm interested in to how that played into your experience, how that influenced you in your life as well as in your career as you were moving into leadership.
Yeah, I think when I so I ran my own company for a little bit, and one of the funniest things that I learned about myself was that I always believed that people who had certain jobs or were running their own businesses and stuff like that, they knew everything. That surely they were there because because they were the experts. And it was really funny because my husband got us some of the business, like, for some of the companies that I was building software for. Like, my husband sort of, like, helped close the deals. And he would just go sell something, and I was like, I have no idea how I'm supposed to do this. So that worked out great, because I was like, okay, but other people have figured it out, so surely I can too. So, and that definitely was the same mindset that I think my mother had as well, because she was, again, one of the early people who had sort of access to computers. She was like, yeah, I can train myself how to do things. And she created a business out of getting Indian banks to come to the digital age, and, like, basically, like, transition a lot of their things, like digitize a lot of their things, and create their first ways that they would keep track of transactions and things like that. So it was again, like, I think that removing that fear of failure of from you is such an important skill to develop. Because if you're afraid of failure, if you're afraid of looking bad, if you're afraid of making mistakes, there's a lot of things that you're not going to try. There's a lot of things that you're just not going to attempt, because you're worried about that piece. So I think I definitely saw my mom just kind of go at it and and figure something out. and I ended up doing something similar in my own entrepreneurship journey, and I think it's been fun.
That's amazing. So how does someone eliminate, or not eliminate? There's never you never eliminate
Hmm.
fear of failure, but how do you mitigate that or make it palatable so that you can fail? Is it that you just try to fail a bunch, or you don't try to fail, but you put yourself in situations where you could fail, and then you get used to it, you get accustomed to it, and you see it as an asset? Or is it like this early paradigm shift where you're like, instead of failing, I'm learning. It's never
Yeah.
this bad thing. Is that like, I mean, is that it, or is there some other secret sauce involved there?
Yeah, I would say that, again, everybody has their own personality type. And for some people, that, like, for some people, that first step, like, I think it is important to just experience failure repeatedly, and then realize that life is still okay. Like, you're still fine. I think that's important, an important exposure to have. But I also realize that for some people, as a personality type, like, that's just really hard to do. Like, some people have a really hard time signing up for something where they might fail, so they want, like, whatever, 80% confidence of success before they attempt something. But I think planning for failure is a very good sort of thing, and saying that, I if I do fail, here is what I should definitely learn from it. And, almost mapping it out where it almost becomes like a game, right? Like, when you play video games, like, you try different things and you fail a couple of times, but then eventually you're like, oh, this is the way I can succeed at that level. So if you gamify that learning mentally, or anything that works for you, I think it's really beneficial to just figure out that next path forward.
I really love that idea you described of gamifying failure or planning for it. That is something that's a paradigm shift for me. I mean, I've always really I think sports are incredible, or because they're a way to gamify this failure, right? It's a contained environment. The loss is finite. You've encapsulated what you're going to lose and what you can win, and that's separate from broader life. If you lose in sports, you're not losing at life. I would hope that people, for the most part, can see that and understand that. And same
Yeah.
thing with games and a lot of these toy
Mhm.
scenarios. But that's a really elegant way to describe it. Is that you're like hedging downside, but you can still put yourself in not necessarily harm's way, but you can put yourself in that fairly risky scenario with constraints and rules, and doing that over and over again simulates the exact same thing, um,
Exactly,
which
exactly.
I think is like a very beautiful way to describe it.
Mhm.
While we're still on entrepreneurship, both of us, I would imagine, have done the
Mm,
speaking tour around a
mm,
lot of the conferences in the data
mm,
space, and there are so many new startups out there within the data domain.
mm,
What do you think about that? Which ones do you think will be around for the longer term, and which
mm.
ones do you think will probably fall by the wayside? And not the specific startups, but like
Yeah, yeah,
themes
yeah.
that you're seeing which are relevant.
Yeah, I've definitely been thinking a lot about it, because one trend that I definitely observed, which I was very happy to see, was that a couple of years ago it felt like every new data startup was BI related. Like, they were kind of on the last step of the funnel of, like, uh, you know surface insights and surface, like, useful information and things like that. And a lot of them were quite similar. Like, I was like, okay, this one does this a little bit better, and then there's this other one that has this feature a little better. But I, as someone who's worked in data for a long time, and I'm sure you have that same observation, that people always notice data problems at that final step. Like, they look at a dashboard and be like, okay, this is not it. But usually the problem is upstream. Actually, almost always the problem is upstream. So I feel like I do like that now there's a lot more startups that are focused on the top end of the funnel. Like, they're talking about data quality, they're talking about data reliability, and, like, just observability at a much higher thing. And there's more sort of platform related stuff, like, companies that are building out experimentation platforms or personalization platforms. Like, I think that's a good thing. I think, besides that, which ones will do well? Like, I think thematically these are good areas for data startups, but ultimately it comes down to execution. You can have a brilliant idea, and if you don't execute on it in a sort of a good incremental manner, which shows your value sooner than you need a lot of money to succeed. Like I think that goes a long way. So the economic climate is changing rapidly. Money in the investing circuit is not flowing as freely as it was a couple of years ago, and so I think startups have to be a lot more precise in the value that they are bringing to the table.
I agree 100%. Execution
Yeah.
is such an important thing, like you described. Something that I think is part of that execution is community building and branding and sort of the softer side of these things. There's so many
Mm.
tools that I see that are essentially the exact same thing as other tools, and it's a great concept.
Mhm.
It's a value added. You have monitoring, you have pipeline building, you have other like ML ops related platforms that are, virtually identical. How
Yeah.
do you differentiate? The one that differentiates an already good existing product is the one that excels well. Maybe that's a little self-serving because I have a marketing agency that helps with with branding for some of these things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that is something that I'm really seeing is that if you want to if you want to build a good product, you need people using your product. If people are using your product, you can get feedback and you can iterate and make the product better. And
Hmm.
that adoption cycle is what a lot of these companies struggle with because they're like, oh, we have this great thing. People obviously use it. And that's just not how business works, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a very interesting kind of feedback loop that they have is like the adoption leads to
Hmm.
better innovation, which a lot of people don't conceptualize it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in enterprise subscription businesses like for a long time in my career, and it was very interesting because I always like that was one of the differences that I saw in consumer subscription businesses versus enterprise. That in subscription in consumer businesses, you're looking at product usage to define the roadmap, and sometimes in enterprise you can just go ask you can just go ask like some of your top customers that like, you look like you're going to keep paying, or you might consider keep paying if I build what you want me to build. So I think the playbook of that building out that feedback loop is a little different, especially when you're starting out. Like again, enterprise companies, once they're big enough, very different playbook. But it makes sense to sort of come at it with that. I always think that companies that have just thrown a lot of money at the problem, like it's you're going to get a different outcome. And I'm not saying you shouldn't throw good sort of money at the problem, but like you have to balance that out with like real tangible specifics that are going to lead you to that positive outcome.
Absolutely. And I think, just companies doing their due diligence and very simple things pays tremendous dividends. Like I've talked with a couple companies and they're like, "Oh, our market, we're trying to target, for example, data scientists directly.
Hmm.
Like we
Hmm.
think them wanting to use our product will make companies adopt our product more." And
Hmm.
honestly, that isn't necessarily the case for a lot of very large companies. I remember I was working at a very large company. I mean, I guess it was GE, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And they just started using a new visualization tool, which was Sisense,
Hmm.
from switching from Tableau because corporate decided that they wanted to switch and that they got a better deal or whatever it might be, right? Like I had literally no input. None of the data
Yeah.
scientists had any input in this decision, right?
Yeah.
And like the idea that, oh, like the data scientists drive all this. In some companies, they do,
Hmm.
right? Some
Hmm.
companies and different organizations, probably on the smaller side. But a lot of companies, if you're trying to sell to enterprise like that, you're not going to have any success trying to get
Yeah.
the data scientists to advocate for this. So it's a very interesting perspective of like where does it matter? I mean, like who is the right market? And these marketers should know this, but they don't for some reason, which blows my mind.
No, and you're absolutely right. Like, the simple basic, who holds the purse strings? Like, it's usually not
Yeah,
the data scientist. Like,
that's almost never them.
it's almost never the data scientist. Like, maybe they're given like some tiny budget for a few small tools. So, yeah, I mean, even when I used to work at Salesforce, I loved Snowflake because I had used it in my previous companies, and I'm like, it's so fast for analysts. Like, you can write a query and it's so quick, and I don't have to do that. But that was completely the wrong pitch, right? Because I mean, they did end up getting Snowflake after I left, but it was because it saved them money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's funny how that works, right? Well, so
Yeah.
you did bring up sort of the tightening economy.
Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
really interested in how you would approach recession planning for someone maybe who's a new entrant into this market. Like
Yeah.
what can someone do to maybe hedge themselves to have better opportunities, or give them a little bit more certainty about what's to come.
Yeah. I mean, I still have some PTSD left from the last recession. I was working during that time, and it's so hard to predict that, whichever business you're working for, like, will it survive or not survive, but like, will it thrive or will it not? Like, it's a little difficult, and it's also difficult to separate your own kind of career growth from the growth of a company or something like that. So I think one thing which I think really helps, like, and I especially think that a lot of our education again doesn't necessarily teach us this, but is to actually stay very conscious and aware of the company's financial performance. Like, most companies, like right now, unfortunately, a lot of companies are having layoffs. Like, that's become very common. You log into LinkedIn and there's more people who just went through that. But keeping track of that, like keeping understanding the predictors of what that happens, is I think one way to just be aware of the possibility. Like, there's never like a situation where it's like, oh, a company will never have layoffs. Like, that's not a thing. Like, if push comes to shove, that might be a decision that the company has to take. So I think I mean, of course, keeping your skills current and relevant, I think, is a good practice. I think also just practicing interviews every once in a while, even if you're not planning to switch a job, is a good thing to do. Because every time I've actually consciously decided that, okay, I'm going to start interviewing, it takes me a while to actually get my resume in order and then practice my pitch. Like, it's something that you just have to practice. So I think just keeping a little bit fresh, seeing what's out there in the market, what is the latest stuff that's respected and that's valued. Like, I think that's a good way to just be prepared, so that if you're ever in a situation where maybe not layoffs, but you just realize that your company is just not going to outlast this current economic climate, you're a little ahead of the game, and you know what to do. And last thing I would say is just network. I think it's really important to have that strong network of, your current colleagues, your previous colleagues, people who've left the company and gone on to do something else, or just going to conferences and things. Like, just building your network. You never know who will come handy when, and building those authentic connections early can really help when you are in a situation where you need something.
Yeah, then for in terms of networking, I couldn't agree more. I think something that a couple of things that I would add. I agree 100%
Mm.
with you.
Mm.
One for me is it's from this book by, I think it's Cal Newport, called "So Good They Can't Ignore You," and
Hmm.
it's the idea is making yourself indispensable to a company. So, what types of processes, what types of work can you be doing with that within that organization that makes it not necessarily like impossible to run without you, but
Yeah.
it makes it like very difficult for things to work. And that's not to say like you don't comment your code and you make it so no one else can decipher it. It's
Yeah,
to
yeah,
say
yeah.
that you're an integral part of this process and they value you so much that you're one of the last to go. I
Yeah,
think
and
that.
also,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
No, no, and also that ties in directly to the self advocacy topic earlier, right? Like, make sure that if you are doing good work already, which you probably are, like, make sure somebody actually understands the value of it. Like, it's not, it's something that they understand, that this person doing X, Y, and Z is actually beneficial to the company, and I think that's a great call out.
Yeah, well, to your point, you don't necessarily become indispensable to a company by just doing exactly what you're told,
Yeah.
right? You find those
Mm.
opportunities to create that additional value by looking around, figuring out where you can create that value, and then
Mhm.
advocating for yourself to be in that position to create that value and to become indispensable.
Yes.
So I think that that's a really important one I wanted to mention. I also think it's pretty important and valuable, which is like super strange advice, but it
Mm.
comes from my like personal perspective, is to like start a side hustle, start other
Mm.
lines of work, create some savings so that you can be more selective if you were to get fired. So if I have I know I have 6 months of money saved up. I have some income coming in from something I've created. I have, probably 4 or 5 months before I really start to panic. And I can use those 4 or 5 months to find a job that I'm really happy with rather than being like, oh, I need to get paid again. I need to turn around and pick something up. And that sort of flows into the like practice you're interviewing and like staying sharp on that front. But to me, um, I have multiple streams of income from content
Hmm.
creation, from investments, from all these different things.
Yeah.
Realistically, in a bad economy, yes, those will reduce, but I still
Hmm.
have those coming in. They're still creating value for me. If you get fired from your job, I mean, you might get some residual payout, but essentially, you go from having a ton of income to zero income like that. And that to me, at least for me, is the scariest thing. So I've worked very hard to try to create these systems that allow me to have some residual stuff coming in. So, uh, you know, people would say historically before the last recession, like, Ken, what you're doing, it's so risky. How could you do that? What, your appetite for risk
Hmm.
must be crazy.
Hmm. Hmm.
To me, it's the opposite. What I'm doing is so much less risky because I have control over it. And it's not that this water tap is going to get shut off. It's that, okay, it might reduce in flow, but the guy over at XYZ company who just got fired, his tap got shut off and he's completely scrambling. I will never be in that scramble state, which I hope I'll never be in that scramble state based on the decisions that I've made. And so, it's not that everyone has to go out and do, start a YouTube channel or create a small business or
Hmm.
whatever. But you
Hmm.
can do like a small contract on Upwork, for example.
Yeah.
You build a portfolio there. That opens the door for if people need data science consulting or contracting in the future. You have that track record and you can get paid for it. And it doesn't mean that everything comes to a screeching halt. So obviously, very passionate about this topic. um, I just want to make sure you're okay on time.
Yeah.
Um, Okay, because we have probably 10, 15 more minutes of stuff. I just want to make sure we get it all in.
Sure. Yeah.
Amazing. So related to that, um, I would love to hear about your current work. So working at Strava, obviously a product that I've used in the past when I was doing a bit more running. Um,
Hmm.
I've not been doing a whole lot of running these days, but I'm interested just to hear about the domain, how you ended up there, and what you like most about your work.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been at Strava now for almost 2 years, and for those who are not familiar with the app, it's a community of athletes. It's where athletes come to share their activities with their community and derive inspiration on our platform. So we're a we're a I think we have a lot of fans. There's a lot of people who love what our platform does. And for me, Strava was a very interesting opportunity because I my last few companies have all been companies where the product itself was data. Like data was the product, and you basically you have a skin on top of the product, which is what our customers see. But like inherently, if we didn't have data, we don't have a product. So Strava is like that. All the activities that our athletes on our platform record, each of them is generating tons of data. Like if I go for a run, it knows my exact map location at any point of time. It knows my heart rate. It knows like every piece of tiny bit of data that my whatever tracking device is using. Like it stores that. And then for our athletes, there's a lot of different things that they can use it for their own performance improvement, for their own sort of experience and things like that. So for me, my team at Strava is basically the data organization, which is all the analysts and the machine learning engineers. And yeah, I mean, I love the output that the team has. Like we are supporting the company to make better decisions by learning from our athletes, and also including optimizations in our product that are data driven. So learning from product usage, learning from the voice of our customers, learning from our marketing efforts, and all of those type of things. It's an exciting world to build because I also just I think Strava as a product is a product that is very close to human behavior. Like I think I inherently feel that everybody has some wish to move. Some people have it more than others, but movement is a very important part of people's life. And I think just understanding that as a behavior is also just very, very fascinating, very, very fascinating work for me.
That's amazing. Are there any insights about human behavior, athletes in general, or movement that you can share publicly that might be just like some fun facts that you've run across?
Yeah, I guess mentally quickly sifting through the list of what we've already disclosed publicly. We do have a year in sport report that we publish every year, and
Oh,
that
sweet.
yeah, it's a pretty cool, like, you can find it online, and we publish that at the end of the year. And it's pretty interesting because it shows again those sort of patterns of sport across the world. So we have it as a global list, and we'll call out some things there about, like, how do the stats vary for men and women, or how do the stats vary for someone in US versus someone in Japan, or something like that. And I think one of the very interesting things that I remember was changing habits, part of as, like, almost from a perspective of climate change, like what happens when the conditions are actually hotter outside. And we did see that there was differences in how willing people were to participate in a sport outdoors, versus indoors, as the temperature in their city was very high. So we did actually map those out, and I find it super fascinating because it's something that directly also, like, I care a lot about, like, the topic of climate change and what we can do for it. And we can see those patterns of how it even affects something basic like people exercising, because exercising is not, it's not just for like, some people may do it for performance, some people may do it because it's fun and they do it with their friends. For some people it's a fitness, it's like, it's a requirement, it's a health requirement. Like, you and I may have a doctor who tells us, like, you need to do this, otherwise you're not going to be healthy. So intersecting that with climate and, like, all of that, like, it's super fascinating because I feel we have one more opportunity to prove to the world that climate stuff is important. It has consequences to people in a very real daily way, and not just sort of the one-offs of, like, oh, there's a heat wave, or there's a hurricane.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think that that's what data science is all about, right? What you just described there of combining two seemingly different data sets, right? To
Mm.
come to a very elegant insight. That's one of the reasons why I do this, is like, how does this thing that I care about, how is it impacted by this other thing that I have access to in terms of data and knowledge, and how do I make better things out of the world, or out of my domain, or out of my
Mm.
community, with what I have access to, and what I can see. And so that to me is such a cool story that you can tell with a relatively, I wouldn't say finite amount of data, but with outside in a domain that is different than what people would expect.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make sure I include that year in sport report in the description as well. I think
So,
that would be really cool, and amazing. So, Shelby, this was incredible. I really enjoyed speaking with you. How can people learn more about you? How can people potentially get in contact with you, if that's something you're open to? Please let me know, and I'll make sure to share those resources as well.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Like, I really enjoyed the conversation as well. It just flows, and I've loved listening to the podcast, other episodes too. So I appreciate you including more people in it. So yeah, the my website is just my first name, shelby.com. So that's easy easy enough to find. And I do have office hours listed. There's a contact me section where I host office hours on a regular cadence, and some of them are free office hours, so it's just first come first serve. I am very open to people just reaching out and setting up time with me to chat. I do a lot of mentoring. Like, I think in 2020 I mentored more than 200 people, so that's something that I really care very passionately about. And so people come to me with all kinds of very interesting topics. And also later this year, I am releasing a book on self advocacy. So there's a slot on my website where people can sign up if they'd like to kind of learn more about it. And yeah, most of my talks and things like that are listed on my website as well.
Well, I would love a signed copy of your book if you're willing to part with one.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Amazing. Shelby, thank you again so much. I again really enjoyed this conversation. I think there's tremendous value across all the areas that we covered.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ken. This was super fun.